So, your fundraising efforts are growing, and you're looking at expanding into new states. First of all, that's a fantastic sign of success for any nonprofit. In this explainer, we're going to walk through a practical compliance checklist to make sure that growth is not just successful, but also sustainable for the long haul.
We're continuing our multi-state fundraising compliance series, where we break down some pretty complex regulatory topics for nonprofit leaders and finance teams. This particular resource is provided by our partners at Ironwood Registrations.
Okay, so let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We'll kick things off by framing expansion as a key compliance decision. Then we'll dive right into a detailed pre-launch checklist, touch on some common mistakes you'll want to avoid, and then wrap everything up by talking about what a strategic compliance mindset really looks like.
Expanding your fundraising into a new state, well, it's an exciting milestone. It's a real signal that your mission is resonating and your organization is growing. But, and this is important, it's absolutely critical to understand that this isn't just a fundraising decision, it's also a compliance decision. You know, the reasons for expanding are almost always incredibly positive. Maybe your donor base is just growing organically, or you've landed a new grant that you can't pass up. Perhaps the digital campaign is just taking off nationally. You might have a new corporate partner, or you're simply gaining more visibility. These are all amazing developments. But before you launch that new campaign or accept those major funds from a new state, this is the essential question that leaders have to ask. A structured approach right here can prevent a ton of headaches, last-minute filings, and just unnecessary risk down the road. And that brings us right to the core of our explainer, a pre-launch checklist. You should think of this as your guide to approaching state expansion deliberately and safely, making sure you're mitigating risk right from the very beginning. Our checklist breaks this whole process down into 6 key steps. We're going to cover everything from identifying the initial trigger for your expansion and reviewing state rules, all the way through to aligning your teams and setting up a solid system to track your new compliance responsibilities. All right, first things first, you have to clarify what is actually driving the expansion. I mean, are you actively mailing or emailing people in a specific state? Are you already getting recurring donations from folks who live there? Understanding this trigger is what helps you determine if registration is even required, how immediate that need is, and whether any exemptions might apply to you. Now, here's a critical point where a lot of organizations get tripped up. There is no single national registration system. I'll say that again. Compliance is handled state by state, and believe me, the rules can vary dramatically. So, the takeaway here is that you have to investigate each state's specific rules. You have to ask the right questions. Does this state require you to register before you even start soliciting? Are there any exemptions based on your revenue? Do you need audited financials? You can never, ever assume uniformity.
And, in today's digital world, this next step is more important than ever. If your expansion involves any online fundraising, you have to assess your exposure. Things like repeated or targeted online activity in a state can absolutely create a registration obligation. Understanding your digital footprint is completely essential.
Next, you need to factor in the timeline. Some states will let you fundraise as soon as you submit your application, which is great, but others require you to wait for their full approval. State processing times can be really long, so your campaign launch should always account for these potential delays. This one highlights a really common internal challenge. So often, the expansion ideas come from the development teams, who are focused on fundraising, right? But the compliance work is typically handled by finance. It is vital that these two teams are talking to each other to prevent those last-minute compliance surprises.
And finally, registration isn't a one-time event. Not even close. Once you're registered, you have to add that state to your compliance calendar. You have to track all the renewal deadlines, and you have to monitor financial thresholds every single year. Each new state adds a long-term responsibility.
Okay, now that we've walked through the checklist, let's highlight a few of the most common pitfalls we see. Avoiding these mistakes can really make the difference between smooth, sustainable growth and a major operational headache. These are some of the most frequent errors out there. Launching a campaign before even looking at the rules, assuming online fundraising doesn't count, filing the initial registration but then completely forgetting to set up a system for renewals. Or, and this is a big one, applying for grants without confirming that you are actually eligible to solicit funds in that state.
This all leads us to a larger, more strategic point. The real goal here is to move your organization's approach from being reactive when a problem comes up to being proactive when it comes to compliance.
So really, you have two choices. You can proactively plan by evaluating requirements before you expand, which, trust me, leads to much smoother growth. Or you can find yourself in a reactive scramble, expanding first and then trying to deal with compliance later, which almost always leads to preventable and often pretty costly remediation work.
And this is really the central message. You have to think of compliance not as a burden, but as a fundamental part of your organization's infrastructure. Responsible, sustainable expansion absolutely depends on it.
So, if you take just one thing away from this explainer, let it be this. Expanding your fundraising into a new state is both a strategic decision about your mission's growth and a critical compliance decision. Proactive planning is the key to reducing your risk and supporting that growth for the long term.
For additional compliance guides and other educational resources on charitable solicitation registration and multi-state fundraising, please visit ironwoodregistrations.com. Thanks so much for watching.